Week 10 of the fantasy football season. Here's top 36 running backs this week. Number one, who else would it be than Christian McCaffrey of the San Francisco 49ers? So what a great season. Christian McCaffrey. Games in a row with a touchdown. And this week, I know Jacksonville's been a solid unit this week. I think for the San Francisco 49er team to get back on track, they got to feed the ball to McCaffrey early and often in the passing game as well. And I think this week he has a big game once again. Number two, Alvin Kamara, the New Orleans Saints. Alvin Kamara, what a season it's been for him, even though we know he missed the first few weeks of the season with suspension. And this week, a good matchup in Minnesota. He's been a PPR machine, catching a lot of passes out of the backfield. And this Minnesota defense, I don't really think is going to have an answer for Alvin Kamara in this game, in between the tackles or catching the ball out of the backfield. I know last week he didn't run the ball well, but catching the football and finding the end zone has been the name of the game for Kamara this season. So last week, after a down week, I think he bounces back with a huge performance. Number three, Austin Eckler, the Los Angeles Chargers. So Austin Eckler last week, he had a solid game versus a tough defense in the New York Jets, but he did drop 3 passes in that game. So this week here, I think he gets his focus back a little bit as Austin Eckler. It's not going to be versing as tough as the defense. And we know that Jet defense was hitting hard on that Monday night game. This week here, potential shootout versus the Lions back home in Los Angeles. Austin Eckler, he's looked healthy over the last few weeks, and I think he's back to form. Number 4, Jonathan Taylor of the Indianapolis Colts. So Jonathan Taylor, finally, he didn't split the backfield with Zach Moss in last week's game, even though the defense did most of the damage for this Indianapolis Colts team, where the offense wasn't on the field for the majority of the second half. So Jonathan Taylor, he's got his legs on the rim. Everything's good over there in Indianapolis after signing the extension. And this week here versus New England defense, that's still pretty decent, I believe. I still think he could go into Germany and have a solid game and be a top performer. Number 5, Breece Hall of the New York Jets. Breece Hall, he looks pretty much 100% coming off the ACL, and he's the engine of this offense. We know Zach Wilson really can't get the ball down the field and make big plays and get it consistent to his wide receivers, and a lot of screen passes and just a lot of force feeding Breece Hall, and rightfully so. This week here, he's going to Vegas versus a pretty solid defense over the last few weeks, where they could get to the quarterback and cause havoc. But Breece Hall's a home run hitting running back, big playability, and like I said, the health is pretty much almost 100% coming off the ACL in the offseason. Number 6, Travis Etienne of the Jacksonville Jaguars. So Etienne, he's been a top fantasy running back this season. Him and Christian McCaffrey neck and neck, I feel like, for the top 2 guys in the league. So Travis Etienne could catch the ball out of the backfield. In between the tackles, he's definitely improved. And him and Trevor Lawrence, obviously, were college teammates as well. So this week, definitely a tougher matchup. So reinforce San Francisco front line, trading for Chase Young at the deadline, and Randy Gregory getting some more reps as the weeks have gone on. But anyway, Travis Etienne, he's pretty much matchup proof. And we know running back's been a weak position this season, so he's definitely, even in a matchup like this, a top 10 guy. Number 7, Joe Mixon of the Cincinnati Bengals. So Joe Mixon, he got off to a slow start early in the season, but a player like Mixon with a lot of veteran experience and just workload year after year, you just know the numbers are going to be there. And this offensive line has figured things out, and Joe Burrow, with him being pretty much 100% healed from that calf injury, it just opens everything up, and Mixon's found the end zone the last 2 weeks. This team's playing great football, and this week here versus a young Houston team, which just gave up a decent amount of fantasy points to Rashard White, I think Joe Mixon has a good game, and if Jamar Chase does miss this game, even more work for Mixon it will be in this one. Number 8, Josh Jacobs, the Vegas Raiders. So Jacobs had a big game last week versus the New York Giants, and this week here, he's got a matchup versus the New York Jets, where we know their defense is solid. We know they have a tough time running backs running versus defense. We saw it with Austin Eckler, even though he did find the end zone in last week's ball game. But right now, Josh Jacobs is the workhorse, and now with a rookie quarterback, just more workload and even more dump off. So on volume alone, even versus a tough defense, I think Jacobs is a solid performance. Once again, number 9, Ramondre Stevenson of the New England Patriots. So Stevenson, coming into the year, I was pretty high on Stevenson as being a good receiver out of the backfield, a decent running back in between the tackles. I know Ezekiel Elliott's taken a decent amount of work from Stevenson this season, but the last few weeks he's gotten back on track, and last week did run a 55-yard touchdown to the house. So this week in Germany, in a matchup versus the Colts, where their defense isn't all that great versus the run, we even saw Chuba Hubbard carve out a good game last week. I got him in 9. Number 10, Derrick Henry the Tennessee Titans. So I think this Titan offense definitely opens up with a rookie quarterback in Will Levis, who could stretch the field and get that football way down the field, 40, 50 yards on the fly. So Derrick Henry's still a solid running back. I know this Tennessee offensive line is one of the worst in the league, but Henry, week in and week out, he's going to get his 15, 20 touches. You know, he's getting all the goal line work over there. And he's still the vocal point of the offense, even though now they finally got a quarterback that could stretch the field in Levis. Number 11, Rashard White of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, staying in the same game. So I think both running backs will be productive. Rashard White, over the last few weeks, he's really getting more passes thrown his way out of the backfield and looking even better in between the tackles. So with volume with Rashard White, really with no competition in the backfield. People thought it could have been Sean Tucker coming into the year and Vaughn, but that hasn't been the case. So this week here versus Tennessee, I know they're good versus the run, but like I said, I think White's a better receiver at times than running in between the tackles. Number 12, Kenneth Walker of the Seattle Seahawks. So Walker the last 2 weeks, I know he's been out-touched by Zach Charbonnet. I know the numbers have gone way down in terms of fantasy points, but this week versus Washington, I think Seahawks, they get back to basics, running the football a lot, and getting Kenneth Walker more involved in the passing game, because Geno Smith, he struggled over the last few weeks, especially last week, only scoring 3 points in that game at Baltimore. So right now, I think they get the run back on track. I think they get some easy plays as well to get some yards, throwing the football to Kenneth Walker. And it's a big game versus the Commanders. In a home game for Seattle, 13, Saquon Barkley of the New York Giants, a tough matchup versus the Dallas Cowboys. I know Barkley's had a good track record versus Dallas, but this week's going to be tough sledding. He obviously runs behind a bad offensive line, and Tommy DeVito being the starting quarterback isn't going to help things. But we saw it 2 weeks ago versus the New York Jets, 36 touches in that game for Barkley. So no matter what, they're going to force feed him, I believe, is this New York Giant team. And they got to, if you want to keep Dallas's offense off the field, and if you want to keep this defense honest. So I think Barkley's in for a big workload. It might not amount to anything, but just on workload and potential, I have him still as a top 15 guy. 14, Tony Pollard of the Dallas Cowboys. So Tony Pollard this season, going into the year, I thought it was a little questionable. He was going to be a first-round pick in fantasy drafts, and he really hasn't done much over the last 4 or 5 weeks, even last week in a game where I thought they would emphasize the run a little bit more versus Philadelphia. Even though it was tough, Tony Pollard didn't do much, only 9 points in PPR leagues. I know this week here it's a good matchup versus the Giants, where in week 1 it was the best game of the season for Pollard, where he had 22 points. So maybe this Cowboy team gets Pollard going in this one, because this is a game where I believe the Cowboys should win pretty easily, where the Giants are depleted on offense with no Daniel Jones or even Tyrod Taylor and Darren Waller out. And the Cowboys, I think, want to get the run game going once again. And Pollard, I'm playing conservative with him and have him at 14, 15, Bijan Robinson of the Atlanta Falcons. I just don't get it. Arthur Smith don't want to get the ball to Bijan Robinson. And why waste an early round draft pick in last year's NFL draft to get Bijan? So Bijan, we know, is a great athlete. We know he's a good receiver out of the backfield. Already could be one of the best. But obviously, just quarterback play and game plan, and Arthur Smith's holding this kid back, in my opinion. So Bijan Robinson, we saw some flashes early in the season, but the last month of the season, not much has happened for Robinson, with his best game in this time being 12 fantasy points. His ranking has definitely dropped off over the last few weeks. It's definitely a good matchup at Arizona, but we just got to see how he's used. But he's still getting volume, and he's still got playmaker and game-breaking ability. 16, Aaron Jones of the Green Bay Packers. So Jones finally got a full workload last week, with A.J. Dillon not being a factor in the backfield for this Green Bay Packer team. And this week it's definitely a tough matchup at the Pittsburgh Steelers. But Aaron Jones, he's one of the better receiving backs out of the backfield as well over the last few seasons. So this week here, even with a tough matchup, but with a young quarterback in Jordan Love, like I mentioned, they're going to try to run the football a lot. And I think safe throws to Jones out of the backfield for screens or even quick hitch routes and corner routes here, I think, could get involved at Pittsburgh. Number 17, Jahmyr Gibbs of the Detroit Lions. So it looks like David Montgomery is going to be back in this game, even though Dan Campbell said Jahmyr Gibbs is still going to be a big part of the offense, and rightfully so. The last 2 weeks before the bye week, Gibbs had 25-plus fantasy points in PPR leagues. So Jahmyr Gibbs is a great athlete. We know he's a home run hitter running back, and he's already a top 3, top 5 receiving back out of the backfield, in my opinion. And they took him 12th overall for a reason. So this week here, in a potential shootout in an indoor game at the Chargers, I still think he's a solid number 2 running back for fantasy owners. 18, Javonte Williams of the Denver Broncos. So Javonte Williams, he looks like Breece Hall, where his knee's pretty much 100% coming off the ACL injury. In the last 2 weeks before the bye week, Williams was going out there and putting up fantasy points. I know this week it's a tough matchup at Buffalo, but pretty much Samaje Perine hasn't been a factor in the backfield the last few weeks for this Denver Bronco team. And Jaleel McLaughlin, he's still in there as a third down back, but right now in between the tackles and even catching some passes, Williams has done a lot of that with the workload going up, and now coming off a bye week, being refreshed, and another week where he could rest that knee a little bit. I think Javonte Williams, once again, is a solid number 2 running back. 19, David Montgomery of the Detroit Lions. So David Montgomery, early in the season, he looked like he was the man, and Jahmyr Gibbs was just a change of pace back after a few big games in week 4 and week 5. But then with the injury, Montgomery's missed the last few weeks here, and Gibbs, he's definitely earned himself a big role in this offense. So this week here, Montgomery, I still think he's going to get anywhere from 12 to 15 touches. Gibbs is a better receiver out of the backfield, more explosive. But this team, they could run a two-headed monster in that backfield and still be successful. So this week, I still think Montgomery could be a decent option for fantasy owners. Number 20, James Cook of the Buffalo Bills. So James Cook, the last couple weeks, his numbers have definitely dropped off. And this Bill team, they just abandoned the run in last week's game at the Cincinnati Bengals. Not really giving it a chance, but at least James Cook could catch the ball out of the backfield. He's their best receiving back out of the backfield. I know Leonard Fournette is signed over there, but he was on the practice squad, and they got to call him up from the squad, and it wouldn't be surprising if that happens this week. But anyway, this week versus the Broncos, they give up the most fantasy points to running backs on the season. I think James Cook bounces back in this one and has one of the better games of the season. Number 21, Jerome Ford of the Cleveland Browns. Jerome Ford, he's been filling in pretty well for Nick Chubb, in my opinion. I think he's a better receiver out of the backfield than Nick Chubb. He's definitely got burst and home run ability. We've seen it this season. I know it's a very tough matchup at the Baltimore Ravens, one of the better defenses in the league. But like I said, Jerome Ford, it just takes one big run for him to have that monster fantasy day. And this week here at Baltimore, if they want to set the tone, I think they got to get the run game going a little bit and play a little safe with underneath routes. Number 22, James Conner of the Arizona Cardinals. So definitely a possibility Conner returns in this game. It needed. Timacito really hadn't done much, and Keontae Ingram pretty much non-existent in the few games where he got work. So James Conner, we know, is a good running back, but injuries have always been a problem, and now coming off the injury after 4 weeks here, running into a decent Atlanta Falcon team, even though Kyler Murray is back in the mix. I think James Conner could carve out decent number 2 running back numbers this week. And if he does return, I got him at 22, 23, Gus Edwards of the Baltimore Ravens. So Gus Edwards, he's been a touchdown-dependent back, no doubt about it. In the last few weeks, he's been a touchdown machine, is Gus Edwards, with 5 touchdowns in the last 2 games. So this week here, tougher matchup versus one of the better defenses in the league. Myles Garrett leading the way. Zadarius Smith, Denzel Ward. And this Cleveland defense, they got hard hitters and guys who get to the quarterback. So Gus Edwards, a fluky game last week where he had 5 carries, 52 yards in that one, and found the end zone twice. This week here, it's going to be more Keaton Mitchell, I think, mixed into the rotation as well, where it pretty much could be a 3-man committee over there with Justice Hill, Edwards, and Keaton Mitchell. So right now, he's falling down a little bit with a tougher matchup. And with Keaton Mitchell emerging last week, with 24, Alexander Madison of the Minnesota Vikings, more work should go his way now, where Cam Akers out for the season with the torn Achilles. Even though I know Ty Chandler could be creeping and get some work in the backfield. Chandler, we know, is possibly a better wide receiver out of the backfield than Madison. Even though last week we saw Madison, he did have a 46-yard catch. But this week here, tougher matchup versus the New Orleans Saints. The workload's going to be there. Joshua Dobbs will be starting at quarterback, and he's not afraid to take some of the runs himself, obviously, is Joshua Dobbs. But this week, with a decent workload, and now Akers out for the season, even in the tougher matchup, I got Madison as a number 2 running back option for owners. 25, Chuba Hubbard of the Carolina Panthers. It looks like he's the starting running back over there, is Herbert. The last 2 weeks, he's been named the starter. Last week, he went out there and played a good game. And this week, a good matchup on Thursday Night Football at the Chicago Bears, that we know have one of the worst defenses in the league, and Hubbard, a better wide receiver out of the backfield than Miles Sanders. So Sanders signed a nice contract in the offseason, and it just didn't work out, even though Sanders, on one of the drives, he looked pretty decent last week. But anyway, Chuba Hubbard, better receiver out of the backfield. Frank Reich and the coaching staff likes him. And this week at Chicago, he's a fringe number 2 flex option. 26, Khalil Herbert of the Chicago Bears. So Herbert's been practicing, and it looks like he's going to give it a go on Thursday Night Football, staying in the same game versus the Panthers. So we know the Panthers, one of the worst defenses in the league, one of the worst teams in the league, 1-7. And Khalil Herbert, we know he's a dual threat, catching the football out of the backfield and running in between the tackles. So it's like him getting a good workload in this game. I think Foreman and Rashard Johnson still might be factors in this backfield, but Khalil Herbert, clearly the talented running back out of those two guys in the backfield. And this week in a good matchup versus Carolina, I think it's a good game to get him back in the thick of things. 27, Najee Harris of the Pittsburgh Steelers. And Najee Harris, he's been a decent running back over the last 2 weeks, actually getting fantasy points and finding the end zone. But this week it could be a little bit of a tougher matchup versus the Green Bay Packers, where they've had a solid run defense for the most part of the season. But Najee Harris, he's been scoring touchdowns the last few weeks. The burst still hasn't been there, and receiving the football out of the backfield, we really haven't seen much out of him. But in terms in between the tackles, making some plays and getting the extra yard or two and finding the end zone at the goal line, Najee Harris has brought that to fantasy owners. But still, he's not a running back that has a high ceiling. 28, Brian Robinson of the Washington Commanders, so a touchdown-dependent running back for sure is the physical running back, Brian Robinson, with Antonio Gibson being the receiving back out of the backfield. This week here versus a pretty stout Seattle run defense, even though last week the Ravens did torch them for over 200 yards on the ground. But right now, this offensive line of this Washington Commander team really isn't that good. Robinson, his yards per carry the last few weeks have gone down. This week here is a back-end number 2 running back or a flex option. Robinson's touchdown dependent in a tougher matchup at Seattle. 29, Jalen Warren of the Pittsburgh Steelers. Jalen Warren, he had a nice week last week in that victory for the Pittsburgh Steelers on Thursday Night Football versus the Tennessee Titans. And this week here, Green Bay Packers coming to town, and him and Najee Harris, they've been neck and neck all season in these rankings. Warren, obviously a more explosive running back and a better receiving back out of the backfield, but still the workload's in Najee Harris's favor. And now with the last 2 weeks, Najee Harris having good games, I think Warren's workload could be cut just a little bit. But this week, I still think he has good potential. Like I said, still going to be the third down back and passing downs back on most downs. And I think as a flex option, he can help fantasy owners. Number 30, Zach Moss of the Indianapolis Colts. So Zach Moss, he's been solid this season, no doubt about it. But now Jonathan Taylor looks like he's up to snuff. His conditioning and him taking a big workload. And last week we saw him take a back seat, Zach Moss. Only 7 carries in the game, even though I know this Indianapolis Colt team's offense wasn't on the field a lot, especially in the second half where they had 2 pick sixes to put that game on ice. So Zach Moss is a talented running back. He can catch the ball out of the backfield, running between the tackles. But we know Jonathan Taylor got a 3-year, $42 million deal, and it's his backfield. And now we're getting 74% of the snaps in last week's game. Zach Moss, his value definitely dropping down the rankings. But this week versus the Patriots in Germany, I think he could go out there and still carve out a decent game. And if you're desperate in deeper leagues, still help you a little bit. 31, Devin Singletary of the Houston Texans. Damian Pierce has been a non-factor this year, and Singletary and Pierce were splitting 50-50 over the last few weeks. Before last week, Pierce couldn't play in the game, and Singletary, to be honest, he really didn't take a clear-cut role as the number 1 guy for this Texan team, where last week they were passing the football up and down the field, and Singletary's yards per carry just weren't that good. But Singletary knows a better wide receiver out of the backfield than Pierce. He's got a lot of experience doing that with the Buffalo Bills, where they were a pass-first team, obviously, and Josh Allen taking a lot of runs. But this week in a matchup at Cincinnati, I think this team has to establish the run a little bit to get their play action going. And Cincinnati, knowing now that they want to be a pass-first team with C.J. Stroud, they got to get the run going. So I think this week Singletary, once again, even if Pierce comes back, will be leading the backfield in touches. And like I said, it's a better wide receiver out of the backfield as well than Damian Pierce. 32, Kareem Hunt of the Cleveland Browns. So Kareem Hunt and Ford, they're pretty much in a timeshare, with Jerome Ford getting about 65-70% of the touches. So Kareem Hunt, we know he's more of a physical in between the tackles back than Jerome Ford, but Jerome Ford is more the home run hitting type of running back. So this week, a tough matchup at the Baltimore Ravens. I think this game is going to be a grinded out type of game, or it could be a blowout, just the way the season's gone here for this Baltimore Raven team. But Kareem Hunt, at this point, we know he's lost a step or two. He's not the running back he obviously was in his Kansas City Chiefs days, but I still think he can help fantasy owners if you need help at the running back position. 33, Zach Charbonnet of the Seattle Seahawks. So believe it or not, Charbonnet's led the backfield in touches between him and Kenneth Walker in the last 2 weeks. But I think they got to get back to basics is the Seattle Seahawks team. They got to get running the football with Kenneth Walker more and him getting more catches out of the backfield as well. But Charbonnet, he was taken in the second round for a reason, and now he's a running back seeing more of the field the last few weeks. A physical running back that could run in between the tackles. He's a pretty decent blocker as well, and he could catch the ball out of the backfield. So pretty much this Seahawks team has 2 running backs that could be 3 down backs. So this week, it wouldn't be surprising if it's a 50-50 split. And these guys just need more touches in general. Last week, we only saw 9 touches for Kenneth Walker. And Zach Charbonnet, he had 11 touches total in last week's game. So this week here in a matchup versus the Commanders, where I think they could get the running game going and at a high level, I have them at 33, 34. Antonio Gibson staying in the same game of the Washington Commanders. So Antonio Gibson, we know he pretty much doesn't run the football in the between the tackles a lot, with Brian Robinson having that job. But Brian Robinson, his yards per carry have gone down. And Gibson, he was a wide receiver in college, and now he's been the passing downs back, and pretty much all his work has been catching the football. Sam Howell likes Gibson out of the backfield, catching the football. This could be a ball game where they're down early and often over there in the 12th man at Seattle is this Washington Commander team. And last week he had 12.5 fantasy points in PPR leagues. Here was Antonio Gibson. So this week here, once again, I think he could go out there at Seattle and carve out back-end numbers as a flex option. 35, Tajay Spears of the Tennessee Titans. So Tajay Spears, we know he's the passing downs back over there in Tennessee. And we also know he's outsnapped Derrick Henry a few times this season. But now with Will Levis at quarterback, be a lot of close games, I believe, for the Tennessee Titans, where Ryan Tannehill just couldn't get the ball down the field, and the games really weren't close for the most part. So Tajay Spears still going to be the third down back, still going to be passing down situations running back for the most part here. Obviously, unless it's a short yardage thing, which is Derrick Henry's bread and butter throughout his career. But Tajay Spears at Tampa Bay, where we just saw them get shredded by Houston Texan offense. I think Tajay Spears, as a deep desperation guy, you could use him, especially in PPR leagues, where if he could get 3-4 catches, that could help and get 30-40 yards total. And the 36th and final running back I'm ranking is Keaton Mitchell of the Baltimore Ravens. So Mitchell, he's a player that all season we've heard the Ravens talk up, but he just didn't really get an opportunity until last week. 9 carries, 138 yards, and a touchdown. And he showed that burst and that breakaway speed with a big 60-yard touchdown in that game for Keaton Mitchell. So this week here versus Cleveland, it wouldn't be surprising if they use Mitchell more in this one to spread this defense out and to get speed on that field to go with Lamar Jackson in this offense. So Mitchell, one of the hot waiver wire pickups this week. I'm not going to say he's going to be the starting running back and get a majority of the touches in this backfield, but if there's a change of pace back and a home run hitting type of back, it's definitely a possibility. And of course, to add another wrinkle to this offense, and especially in a tougher matchup versus Cleveland. So that's the top 36 running backs I'm ranking here for week 10 of the fantasy football season.